The train whistle echoed across the vast Montana landscape as Sarah Elizabeth Murphy pressed her gloved hands against the frost-covered window. The winter of 1887 had painted the world in shades of white and gray, and her breath fogged the glass as she watched endless miles of snow-covered prairie roll past. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, each beat reminding her of how far she had traveled from everything familiar. In her worn leather satchel lay the letter that had changed her life. 3 months ago, she had been a seamstress in Boston, living in a cramped boarding house and struggling to make ends meet after her father's death. The advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like a beacon of hope. Widowed rancher seeks gentlewoman for marriage and companionship. Must be kind to children. Correspondence welcomed. Now, as the train slowed its approach to Cedar Ridge, Sarah wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her 22 years. She had never been with a man, had barely been kissed, and here she was, traveling to marry a stranger named Thomas Mackenzie who owned a cattle ranch and had a young daughter named Emma. The conductor's voice boomed through the car. Cedar Ridge, Montana, end of the line. Sarah's hands trembled as she gathered her few belongings. Her entire life fit into one small trunk and a carpetbag. She wore her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out her eyes, though it was plain and showed the careful mending she had done over the years. Her brown hair was pinned neatly beneath a simple hat, and she carried herself with the quiet dignity her mother had taught her before consumption took her when Sarah was 16. The platform was nearly empty when she stepped off the train, her boots crunching on the packed snow. The bitter wind cut through her coat, and she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. A few other passengers hurried toward the station house, their breath creating white clouds in the frigid air. She scanned the platform, looking for the man who had described himself in his letters as tall with dark hair and kind eyes. Her stomach churned with nervousness as she realized she might not recognize him, or worse, that he might take one look at her and decide she was not what he had hoped for. "Miss Murphy." The voice was deep and gentle, and she turned to see a man approaching her. He was indeed tall, perhaps 6 feet, with broad shoulders beneath a heavy coat. His dark hair showed touches of silver at the temples, and his eyes were the warm brown of coffee beans. Worry lines creased his forehead, and there was a weariness about him that spoke of hard work and harder losses. "Mr. Mackenzie," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She had practiced saying his name during the long train journey, but now it felt foreign on her tongue. He removed his hat, revealing more of his graying hair. "Thomas, please, I'm grateful you came all this way." His eyes searched her face, and she wondered what he saw there. Fear, certainly, uncertainty, but perhaps also the quiet strength that had carried her through her father's death and the difficult years that followed. "Your journey was long," he continued, reaching for her trunk. "The wagon is just over here. Emma is at home with Mrs. Henderson, our neighbor. She's been excited about your arrival." They walked in silence to where a sturdy wagon waited, hitched to 2 dark horses that stamped their feet impatiently in the cold. Thomas loaded her trunk into the back with practiced ease, then helped her up onto the wooden seat. His hands were gentle but brief in their touch, and Sarah felt a flutter of something she could not quite name. The ranch was a 40-minute drive through countryside that seemed to stretch forever in all directions. Thomas pointed out landmarks along the way, the creek that ran through his property, the line of cottonwood trees that provided windbreak for the house, the distant mountains that looked like purple shadows against the gray sky. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, and meant it, though the vastness of it all made her feel very small. "It can be lonely," Thomas admitted, his hands steady on the reins. "Especially in winter. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and town is even farther." "It's not like Boston, I imagine." "No," she agreed quietly. "But Boston had loneliness too, just a different kind." He glanced at her then, something shifting in his expression. "Yes," he said simply. "I think I understand." The house appeared gradually through the swirling snow, a 2-story structure built of logs and stone. It was larger than she had expected, with a wide front porch and windows that glowed warmly in the gathering dusk. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Sarah felt an unexpected tug of something that might have been hope. Thomas helped her down from the wagon, and they had barely reached the porch steps when the front door burst open. A small figure in a blue dress and white pinafore came running out, followed by an older woman with silver hair and a concerned expression. "Papa, Papa, is that her? Is that my new mama?" The child stopped abruptly when she saw Sarah, her wide blue eyes taking in every detail. She was perhaps 6 years old, with blonde ringlets that had escaped from their ribbons and rosy cheeks from the cold air. Her face held the same gentle features as her father, but there was an eagerness there that made Sarah's heart clench. "Emma," Thomas said gently, placing a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. This is Miss Murphy. She's come a very long way to meet us. Are you going to be my mama? Emma asked directly, her voice filled with such hope that Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. The older woman stepped forward, shaking her head. Emma Mackenzie, you mind your manners. I'm Helen Henderson, she said to Sarah with a warm smile. I've been looking after this little one while Thomas was in town. Sarah knelt down so she was at Emma's eye level, her heart racing. The child's face was so open, so trusting, and she could see in those blue eyes a longing that matched her own. I hope we can be friends first, Sarah said softly. Would you like that? Emma nodded solemnly, then surprised Sarah by stepping closer and reaching out to touch the fur trim on her coat. It's soft, she whispered. Mama's coat was soft too, before she went to heaven. Thomas's face tightened with old pain, and Sarah understood suddenly that this was not just about finding a wife. This little girl needed a mother, and that need called to something deep in Sarah's heart. Would you like to see my room? Emma asked, taking Sarah's hand without hesitation. Papa painted it yellow because I said it was like sunshine. I would love to see it, Sarah replied, allowing herself to be pulled toward the house. The interior was warm and inviting, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. The furniture was simple but well made, and Sarah could see Thomas's attempts to create a comfortable home for his daughter. There were books on the shelves, a rocking chair near the fireplace, and child's drawings pinned to the wall. Emma led her up the stairs, chattering about her dollhouse and her collection of smooth stones from the creek. Her room was indeed painted a cheerful yellow, with white curtains at the windows and a small bed covered with a colorful quilt. I made this, Emma said proudly, showing Sarah a crooked sampler with uneven stitches. Mrs. Henderson is teaching me to sew, but it's very hard. It's beautiful, Sarah said, running her fingers over the careful work. I'm a seamstress, actually. Perhaps I could show you some tricks to make it easier. Emma's face lit up like sunrise. Really? Could you teach me to make dresses for my dolls? If your father says it's all right, I would be happy to. They spent the evening quietly, sharing a simple dinner that Mrs. Henderson had prepared before she returned to her own home. Emma chattered throughout the meal, telling Sarah about the ranch animals, her lessons with Mrs. Henderson, and her hopes for Christmas, which was still 6 weeks away. Thomas was quieter, watching the interaction between his daughter and Sarah with careful eyes. Sarah could feel his assessment, knew he was trying to determine if she would be good for Emma, if she could fill the void that his wife's death had left in their small family. After Emma was tucked into bed, Thomas and Sarah sat by the fireplace, the silence stretching between them. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and reminding Sarah of how isolated they were. She's a wonderful child, Sarah said finally. You've done well with her. She needs more than I can give her, Thomas replied, staring into the flames. A woman's guidance, gentle hands for the things I don't understand. When Margaret died 3 years ago, I thought I could be enough for Emma, but... His voice trailed off, and Sarah saw the weight of grief and responsibility he carried. How did you know to look for a wife through correspondence? She asked gently. Mrs. Henderson suggested it. She said Emma was growing up too wild, needed feminine influence. I tried courting local women, but... He shrugged. It felt wrong, somehow. Like I was trying to replace Margaret instead of finding someone new. And with a stranger, there are no comparisons, Sarah said, understanding. Exactly. He looked at her then, really looked at her. What made you answer my advertisement, Sarah? A woman like you could have found a husband in Boston. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm not sure what you mean by a woman like me, but I had no prospects in Boston. My father left debts when he died, and I barely earned enough to keep myself fed and housed. I've never, she stopped, embarrassed. Never what? Never been courted properly, never had a beau. I spent my teenage years caring for my mother when she was sick, then my father after she died. By the time I was free to think about marriage, I was past the age when most women marry, and I had no dowry to offer. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I want to be honest with you, Sarah. I loved my wife deeply. I'm not looking for that kind of love again. But I can offer you respect, a comfortable home, and the chance to be a mother to Emma. She's already taken to you more than I dared hope. Sarah's heart squeezed tight. It wasn't a romantic proposal, but it was honest, and she found she appreciated that more than flowery words might have meant. I understand. I'm not expecting romantic love either. But I would like to think we could become friends, partners in raising Emma. I'd like that too. They agreed to wait a week before having the marriage ceremony, to give Sarah time to settle in and make sure she truly wanted to stay. Thomas set up a small room off the kitchen for her to use, and Sarah spent her days learning the rhythms of ranch life and growing closer to Emma. The child was hungry for female attention, following Sarah everywhere and absorbing every lesson she offered. Sarah taught her more advanced sewing techniques, braided her unruly hair into neat plaits, and read to her in the evenings by the fireplace. In return, Emma showed her around the ranch, introduced her to the chickens and the barn cats, and shared the secret places where she went to think about her mother. Thomas was gone most days, tending to his cattle and preparing for winter, but in the evenings he would sit with them by the fire, listening to Emma's chatter about her day with Sarah. Sarah began to see glimpses of the man he had been before grief weighed him down, his dry sense of humor when Emma told tall tales, his patient explanations when she asked about ranch work, his gentle hands when he braided her hair when Sarah was busy with other tasks. On the fourth day, a blizzard struck, trapping them all inside for 2 full days. Sarah had worried about the forced closeness, but instead found it comfortable. She and Thomas worked together to keep the fire burning and meals prepared, while Emma played contentedly nearby. There was something peaceful about the enforced isolation, something that felt like family. It was on the 6th day that everything changed. Sarah was in the kitchen, kneading bread for dinner, when she heard Emma's scream from outside. She dropped everything and ran to the window, her heart stopping when she saw the child near the creek, too close to where the ice looked thin and dangerous. Without thinking, Sarah grabbed her coat and ran outside into the bitter cold. The snow was knee-deep, and she stumbled several times as she made her way toward the creek, calling Emma's name. "I dropped Mama's locket," Emma cried when Sarah reached her. "It fell through a crack in the ice. I have to get it." The child was trying to climb down the small embankment toward the partially frozen creek, where dark water moved sluggishly between sheets of ice. Sarah could see the glint of gold beneath the surface, could understand why Emma was desperate to retrieve it, but she could also see how dangerous the situation was. "Emma, stop," Sarah called, lunging forward to grab the child's arm just as Emma's foot slipped on the icy slope. For a terrifying moment, they both teetered on the edge, Sarah's boots sliding on the frozen ground. Then Sarah managed to pull Emma back, holding her tight against her chest as they both fell backward into the snow. Emma was sobbing, her small body shaking with cold and disappointment. "It was Mama's," she cried. "Papa gave it to me to remember her, and now it's gone." Sarah held her close, her own heart breaking for the child's loss. "Shish, sweetheart, it's all right, we'll tell your father, and maybe when the ice melts in spring, we can look for it then. But what if we can't find it? What if it's gone forever?" Sarah looked into Emma's tear-streaked face and made a decision that surprised her. "Then I'll give you something else to remember your mama by. And something to remember that I love you too." Emma's crying slowed. "You love me?" "I do," Sarah said, and realized it was completely true. Somewhere in the past 6 days, this child had claimed a piece of her heart. "I love you very much. Even though you're not really my mama." Sarah brushed the snow from Emma's hair, thinking about the question. What makes someone a real mama, Emma? Is it just giving birth to you, or is it loving you and taking care of you and wanting the best for you? Emma considered this seriously. "Mrs. Henderson says love is what makes a family. I think Mrs. Henderson is very wise." They were interrupted by the sound of running footsteps, and Thomas appeared, his face white with panic. "I heard screaming," he said, looking between Sarah and Emma. Emma dropped her locket in the creek, Sarah explained, getting to her feet and helping Emma up. She was trying to retrieve it, but the ice isn't safe. Thomas's expression shifted from panic to understanding to sorrow. He knelt down and pulled Emma into his arms. "Oh, little one, I know how much that locket meant to you." "Sarah says she loves me, Papa," Emma said through her tears. "She says maybe we can look for the locket in spring, and she'll give me something else to remember Mama by." Thomas looked at Sarah over Emma's head, his eyes holding a warmth she hadn't seen before. "Is that so?" Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but she met his gaze steadily. "Yes, I meant what I said." That night, after Emma was asleep, Thomas found Sarah in the kitchen, putting away the last of the dinner dishes. "Thank you," he said simply, "for saving her today, and for what you said to her." "I meant it," Sarah replied. "I know I haven't been here long, but Emma has become very dear to me." Thomas moved closer, and Sarah was suddenly aware of his height, his presence. "She's not the only one," he said quietly. Sarah's breath caught. "Thomas, I wasn't looking for love again," he said, his voice low and rough. I thought I was done with all that. But watching you with Emma, seeing how you've brought light back to this house. Sarah, I think I was wrong. Before she could respond, he reached up and touched her cheek gently. Would it be all right if I kissed you? Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but she nodded, and when his lips touched hers, she thought she finally understood what all the romantic stories were about. The kiss was gentle, questioning, and when they parted, she found herself hoping for another. I'd like to marry you tomorrow, Thomas said, his forehead resting against hers. Not just as partners for Emma's sake, but as husband and wife in truth. If you'll have me. Yes, Sarah whispered, and meant it with her whole heart. The next morning dawned clear and cold, and they drove to town together, all three of them, to be married by the minister. Emma sat between them on the wagon seat, chattering excitedly about the wedding and asking if Sarah would teach her to make a new dress for the occasion. As they stood before the altar, Thomas's hand steady in hers, Sarah looked out at their small audience, Mrs. Henderson beaming in the front pew, Emma holding Sarah's bouquet of winter pine and red ribbon, and realized that she had found something she had never dared to hope for. Later, as they sat by the fireplace in their home, Emma asleep in Sarah's lap and Thomas's arm around them both, Sarah thought about the locket at the bottom of the creek. Emma had been right that it was gone, perhaps forever. But in losing one precious thing, she had found something even more valuable. Are you happy? Thomas asked softly, his breath warm against her hair. Sarah looked around at the home they would build together, at the child who was now truly hers, at the man who had offered her not just security but love. Outside, snow was beginning to fall again, but inside, the fire burned warm and bright. Yes, she said simply. I'm home. And for the first time in her 22 years, Sarah Elizabeth Murphy Mackenzie knew exactly what that word meant.